Hey y'all!
Hey Gallivanters!
Today we wanted to talk to you about something we get a lot of questions about. And particularly now in 2021, we're still in the COVID pandemic. So that is about travel insurance.
And there's a lot that goes into this travel insurance, so hopefully we'll be able to answer questions.
Yeah, we'll do our best to give you as much information as we can or as we know. The caveat to that is, no matter what kind of policy you buy, if you buy any, read the fine print. And if you have any questions, talk to an expert, call the companies you're looking at, get your specific questions answered, because we are by no means experts.
No.
We do keep travel insurance. We have it. We'll talk about kind of what we have, but we keep annual insurance as well. So we just wanted to kind of give everybody an overview. And it's really smart to buy some, we think, because there's all kinds of things that can happen, from natural disasters, medical events, missed flights,
losing your luggage.
Yes, or you not losing your luggage, but somebody else losing your luggage.
Yeah.
Terrorism, even tour companies can go bankrupt. So there's a lot of different types, and there's a lot of fine print. So just figuring out what kind of insurance is best for you is what you're going to have to do. And is it trip cancellation insurance? Is it emergency medical evacuation? Is it ones that just cover lost bags or rental cars? There's a whole bunch. And if the question always becomes, do I need travel insurance? Well, I guess the best way we know to tell you is ask yourself, A, are you willing to lose any deposits you may have if for some reason you need to cancel your trip? Do you have the money to come home early, out of pocket early if something happens? Whatever that is. Do you have the money to cover any out-of-pocket medical expenses that may arise? So if you answered no to any of those questions, not being able to afford getting an additional flight out early or paying those medical expenses or any of those things, it's probably a good idea to make sure you have some kind of travel insurance coverage. And there's, all kinds of them out there, but I think the first thing you need to do is probably...
Yeah, you need to check with your own, health insurance, your homeowner's insurance, even on credit cards, the insurance that they have, because some of those may cover, even your homeowners, may cover baggage loss.
Yeah.
Or even with the credit cards, they may cover baggage loss.
Or trip delays.
Anything that has to do with travel, they may cover it. Now, as far as your health insurance, you need to double check and see what they cover, especially if you're going to be traveling internationally.
Yes. We're fortunate in that our insurance does cover us internationally, but, a lot of places don't, or in some cases, it may only cover specific countries, and you've got to kind of get really drilled down into where you're going.
Right, and it may only cover specific things.
Mm-hmm.
Like if it's a true medical emergency that they deem a true medical emergency, they may only cover that. They may not cover you're just going to the emergency room because you feel ill. They may not cover that.
Or you twisted your ankle or something like that.
So you really need to ask the questions and be prepared to ask the questions and what questions and the answers that you want to know when you call them to find out.
Absolutely. So we're going to go over just a few of the kind of basic types of insurance. The first one would be cancellation or interruption. It's usually meant for illness or injury or even death suffered by you or maybe an immediate family member that may or may not be traveling with you. However, sometimes it may cover like, acts of terrorism, so you need to get out of wherever you are. Some even cover financial change. So maybe you book this dream trip and lost your job.
Yep.
And you can't afford to go on the trip anymore. So it all depends on, what you feel comfortable, again, having the coverage for or not having coverage for. There's a lot of policies that are actually comprehensive that kind of cover everything, including, like we mentioned earlier, if a tour company goes bankrupt. But here's the key to that. If you're going on using a tour company, default versus bankrupt. So default means the company is no longer operating or can no longer provide the services. There are companies that go out of business without filing bankruptcy. So if your policy only covers bankruptcy and that company hasn't officially filed bankruptcy or may never file bankruptcy, you're kind of out of luck.
Yeah, exactly.
So if perhaps you are taking a lot of organized tours, look for one that uses the word default instead of bankruptcy.
Right. That way, if they back out or they go out of business, then you're still covered by your insurance.
Yeah. There is policy, and this became a big discussion, particularly last year as the pandemic started, that pandemics are often not covered in any policy. So the kind of policies that typically cover pandemics would be cancel for any reason insurance. It is more expensive, but it literally, you don't feel like going, you're afraid of flying, whatever, you can cancel for any reason.
Yeah.
But that really, again, that is sort of the most expensive insurance you can get. But it does exactly what its name is, which is cancel for any reason. Right. The other thing, though, is that now, in light of the pandemic, a lot of traditional travel insurance companies are adding a rider for pandemic and right now specifically COVID-related issues. They're not necessarily in their standard policies, but if you may have to go up a level in policy or add an additional rider to that, but it will cover anything COVID related. So if you get COVID or your traveling partner gets COVID and there has to be quarantine, paying for that hotel, lodging, whatever kind of accommodations you're required to stay in during that quarantine in that country, and obviously any medical issues related to COVID.
Right.
So those are two other sort of different kinds of riders or caveats that you may want to consider as you're looking at insurance.
And like she said, it may be something that they don't tell you up front, but if you ask about it, it's an add-on.
Mm-hmm.
So depending on what you're willing to pay,
yep, exactly,
it might be worth it.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think another type of insurance we may want to talk about is the medical medevac insurance. So this would cover you, say, if there was a medical evacuation, say you were in the Himalayas and you broke your leg and they had to, helicopter you out of there and then they had to fly you to the nearest hospital. All of that adds up, and without insurance, that's out of pocket for you. And I know I read somewhere where they said it could be up to like $35,000 just to get your transportation to get you medical help.
Yeah, and we were actually on a cruise where they had to helicopter somebody out.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And I can't imagine what that would cost, but I know that that is one of the insurances that they recommend if you're on a cruise, somewhere where you're not going to be near emergency facilities.
Right.
And most cruises do have doctors on board, but they can only handle, so much.
Right. Especially, I mean, like she said, if you're going to be like in remote countries, or if you're going to be in like a newly established country that doesn't have the huge facilities and the medical, help that you need.
Yep.
It can be pricey.
It can. The other thing to think about too on, really any of these, but specifically medical coverage, if you are doing something like whitewater rafting, bungee jumping, skydiving,
zip lining,
that falls under adventure travel and often is excluded. So again, it's another rider you want to make sure is included in your policy.
Right.
Because that's a big deal.
Yeah.
And, talking about the medical insurance and the medevac, it is just that. So while it covers that, what could be tremendous expense, you've still got the rest of this trip that you're now not on.
Yeah.
And guess what? There's nothing, this does not cover the rest of the trip. You do not get that refund if you get just medical medevac insurance.
Right.
Again, so that the second piece of that would be the trip cancellation policy.
Right. So it all just kind of adds up when you have to do these add-ons and these different insurances and what it covers. Like you said in the beginning, read the fine print.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Another thing to keep in mind too with medical coverage, and we actually had a friend who had to deal with this in Ecuador. Well, if you have medical insurance, even if you have your own healthcare insurance here, like ours does cover us internationally, you oftentimes still have to pay up front and then get reimbursed. Yep. So be aware of that as well. Now, it may be, depending on where you are, how developed the medical system is, they may have a system to work with it, but just be aware that you could still ultimately have to pay everything up front, knowing you're going to get reimbursed on the back end.
But that's the kicker.
Yeah.
Knowing you're going to get reimbursed.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes people are more willing to say, hey, yes, I'll pay this up front, knowing that you're going to get reimbursed, than thinking, oh my gosh, I've got this huge medical bill for whatever it is, and it's yours. I mean, you got to pay it, and there's no going back.
Yep. And another thing to think about too, depending again on where you're going, how many countries you're going. I know at one point when we were looking at different trips, the UK, they have a nationalized health system, and they actually were any COVID related healthcare issues you were not going to be charged for. So like if we went over there and had some COVID issue and needed to get health care there, it was going to be free to us as well, even though we're not UK citizens and don't participate in the National Health Service there. So it's another thing to just look for and see what may or may not be covered, because some countries that do have nationalized healthcare will oftentimes cover some simple or kind of routine stuff. I know you actually experienced that, didn't you?
I did. I was actually in Australia and ended up with a kidney stone, which are very painful. So I went to the emergency room and, they fixed me up and got me better and sent me on my merry way. But when I left, I stopped at the desk saying, hey, what do I owe? And they're like, oh, you don't owe anything. So I think as long as they have your information and they have basically where you're staying and that you are there or wherever on vacation, and I think a lot of that has to do with just kind of like an honor system.
Yeah.
Like, okay, you are here visiting, it's obviously something I couldn't help,
right?
So
they covered it.
Yep.
So the other final caveat to medical medevac insurance is that oftentimes there are caveats or exclusions for pre-existing conditions. And every policy is going to have a different definition of that. Some may be if it's been something that you've been diagnosed with or treated with in the last 6 months. Some may be 90 days, some may be 60 days. It all depends. But if you have a condition that, generally, if you have a condition that is well controlled, so let's say maybe you're diabetic, but everything's fine, you're on your insulin and there's no issues, that wouldn't necessarily be excluded. There's a lot of caveats to that we couldn't possibly go into all the detail in.
Yeah.
Just know that pre-existing conditions are sometimes exempt. So if you have any concerns about that, again, ask the question, read the fine print.
Yes. So I think that pretty much wraps up the whole medical medevac insurance policy and the kind of do's and don'ts of that. But I think another big policy is baggage loss, delayed, I think on top of trip cancellation, I think baggage loss is most people's biggest fear.
Yep.
What happens if my baggage gets lost?
Yep.
So there is coverage out there for that.
Yes.
One of the things you want to make sure is you check with the actual airline policy also on lost luggage. And a lot of times, if they lose your luggage or it's even delayed, I think it's more, 6 to 12 hours.
Yeah, depending on the carrier.
Some will give you like a cash allowance for, toothbrush, underwear, t-shirts.
Whatever you need. Yeah.
Until hopefully it hasn't been totally lost. It's just been delayed, but it is out there if you need it.
Yeah, additional policies,
Right.
depending on, because sometimes the airlines will only cover up to a certain amount.
Right.
And for instance, like with us, if we're traveling for 6 weeks or 8 weeks, which we do often, that's probably not going to cover everything we have.
Probably not.
So, it is a rider or a different kind of policy that's available. But again, whatever transportation, whether it's plane, trains, whatever, are going to have some kind of policy, and perhaps your credit card as well.
Right. So here again, check.
Yep. Check
Read
all
the
your-
fine print, get what you need.
Yep, absolutely. And the next one, this is probably the next biggest concern or most common, is flight delays and flight cancellations, which we've had a lot of those here in 2021.
Yep.
So again, flight delay, flight cancellation will typically pay for a hotel room, meals. Again, it'll be a capped amount. It may be $200 a day per person or whatever it is. But again, check with the airlines, because oftentimes airlines may give you a voucher. They may have an
Right.
agreement with a local hotel, so they may prefer to send you there and give you a voucher for food versus you having to file a claim.
Right.
Again, that could be something that's on your credit cards, but just make sure. Usually there's it's probably a 6 to 12 hour window depending on the policy. So just read your policy carefully and know at what point those, that coverage kicks in.
Right.
So I think the next kind of policy is travel documentation protection.
Yes. And this can basically kick in if you've lost a passport or it's been stolen. It's definitely something to check into because, it can be pricey to replace a passport or even, a visa. It can be extremely pricey. So if you want to make sure that you have some type of coverage, especially traveling internationally, that's another option.
Absolutely. So the next kind of policy is an annual travel insurance policy, which is actually what we carry. Even though we have health insurance that covers us, we have insurance with, I think, every credit card we use.
Right.
We keep that as just a sort of an umbrella policy And it can be, so that way you can actually double dip too as well on policies. Like you can use one as a primary and one as a secondary if you need to make sure you're completely covered. Typically, annual policies are comprehensive. So we've mentioned kind of individual kind of policies up to this point. A lot of times an annual policy will cover all of those things to some extent. And again, you can kind of choose from a menu of, different levels of insurance. Typically, they may be bronze, silver, or gold, or whatever they may happen to call their policies. And each one has a different coverage amount for different things. But it is for us, we just like having it. We know we're covered. And this does cover you whether you're traveling internationally or domestically.
Right.
And, that's important to note as well. I will say this again, and I know we said this before, but there are some countries that are excluded from different types of coverage. So again, it goes back to asking the question and really drilling down into the details. But, it's really important to just think about what your tolerance level is. If you lose your bag, is it going to be the end of the world? Or are you going to be able to go, to whatever store and buy what you need at a reasonable price? For example, if you're traveling for an extended period of time and you may have, expensive clothes that aren't going to be as easy to replace, that may be more important to you. Maybe you don't have a problem having to pay for a flight out if you have to get out early. I mean, you just have to weigh your own personal risk. I will share with you guys, I think our annual policy that covers pretty much everything is around $500 to $600 a year.
Yeah.
And for us, that's worth it.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a seasoned traveler and you travel, 3 times a year, I mean, whether it be domestic or internationally, I mean, it's personally, it's well worth it because anything can happen at any time.
Yeah.
So, but as she said, you just kind of have to weigh the risk that you're willing to take and what you want.
Yes. And there are two other things that we need to talk about a little bit, and that is weather-related cancellations and delays. So I think there are specific riders you can get related to that, winter weather as well as hurricanes. Here's the thing, like a hurricane policy, you can't wait until there's a storm forming and it's been named and then go get a policy. Right. So you have to buy the policy prior to that being there. Otherwise, it's a known event. Right. So, and the same thing with, I think, winter weather. If there's a big winter storm coming and you decide 2 days before your trip, I better get coverage, probably not going to work for you. Yeah. So, again, if you're going somewhere that has a high chance of it's hurricane season and it's in the hurricane belt, when you book the trip, make sure you've got hurricane coverage. Yeah. Same thing for winter, potential winter weather delays. If there's somewhere you're going that has a lot of that, just buy it when you book the trip and that way you're covered. Yeah, because regardless of if you really use it or not, or have to use it, hopefully you won't. Yeah. You still have it. It's kind of that peace of mind knowing that, if this hurricane pops up out of nowhere, and I'm leaving tomorrow, at least you still have it. Absolutely. And we talked a little bit earlier about pandemic coverage and how prior to last year that really wasn't included, and it wasn't, I'm sure you could find a rider somewhere, but it wasn't common. And now almost every big travel insurance company is offering it. The other thing that is now available or is included in a lot of policies that wasn't, it's just been in the last 20 years, and that is acts of terrorism. So after 9/11, obviously, all the flights shut down, people were stranded. That was just a horrible time for everybody.
Right.
Now, oftentimes you will find that a specific part of your policy that either excludes or includes that. So if that's important to you, again, make sure and check it. I mean, obviously there are some areas that have a lot more civil unrest that may be more likely, although as we all know, it can happen anywhere at any time.
Yep.
So if that's important to you, again, check your policy. So I think at the end of the day, I mean, we hope we've helped you. There's a lot of options out there, and there's a lot of ways you may already be covered that you don't even know.
Right.
So, step one is to find out what kind of coverage you have.
Yeah. Do your research.
Does your health insurance cover you? And if so, what does it cover? Does it cover just, life or death emergencies when you're traveling? Or does it cover any, a twisted ankle or, whatever?
Right.
What does your credit card insurance cover?
Right.
What does your car insurance cover, right? Because that's a big one for rental cars.
Homeowners.
And then homeowners or renters even.
Right.
I guess maybe I'm not really sure, but it may. I know
something to check into.
I know homeowners does.
Yeah.
So check everything you have first, and then really assess your risks and what your own personal risk level is and what you feel comfortable with, and then go from there.
Right.
In terms of what you buy. Again, you may only want to have medevac insurance because that $35,000, $50,000, $100,000 may be a little too much to swallow.
Right.
You may feel comfortable with everything else. Then just buy that, and it's obviously going to be less expensive than a comprehensive policy. So do your research, ask the questions, read the fine print. We have kept annual policies for the past several years.
Right.
Fortunately, we've never had to file a claim, even though we were traveling when the pandemic hit. All of the companies we had booked with were reasonable, and we were fine. But just, make sure you know what you have. Make sure you know what your risk is, and then read all of the fine print.
Right.
I'm going to leave some links in the description box below. There are several different websites that allow you to compare different insurance carriers and their policies. So I'll leave a link to that, as well as who we use for our annual policy, and just play around with it and see what it may cost you. If it's something you haven't purchased yet, it's a good idea to just look into, so you'll get an idea of what it might cost.
And like she said, I mean, ask the questions. That's the biggest thing. Mm-hmm. Ask the questions, because I know there are things that we didn't cover or speak about, and that may be something that's personal to you, that you need to find out about if it covers. So ask the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Ask any questions that are important to you, or specifics that you may have that we haven't covered in this sort of broad overview. So we hope that helps you. It's just something that we get asked about a lot, and we wanted to give everybody kind of a general idea of what the landscape of travel insurance looks like right now. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a thumbs up. Also, if you know anybody that this video may help, please share it. That helps us a lot. When you give us a thumbs up and you share the video, it really helps the channel out a lot. We greatly appreciate it.
Yep.
If you have any more questions, if you want to drop them in the comments below, we'll do our best. Again, we're not experts. We're not claiming to be experts, but
we'll help you if we can.
We'll absolutely help you if we can. Don't forget to ring the bell.
Dingy dong.
So you'll be the first to know when we release new content.
And make sure you hit that subscribe button.
Absolutely. And until next time, guys, just remember,
live your best life.
Bye, y'all.
See ya.